Welcome to Nightlight. I'm Barb DeLong, your host. I invite you to step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can ever guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone. Tonight we welcome back Gloria Amendola. She's an author and intuitive with a passion for esoteric knowledge and dream language. She likes to find the truth of things hidden beneath the surface. She travels internationally and speaks to audiences about the Holy Grail mysteries and their connection with the secret destiny of America. Her travels have brought her to sacred sites worldwide to experience these powerful landscape temples firsthand, and they have changed her from the inside out. She's a modern-day Templar in the, and I'm spelling it, OSMTH order. Her commandery is in Rennes-le-Château, France, which is dedicated to Mary Magdalene. She follows in the footsteps of the enigmatic Essenes and Knights Templar, walking where they walked, gathering impressions from the traces they left behind. Gloria has learned that where they walked, so too did the ancients. Initiates of the mysteries have gathered in these sacred sites worldwide for many reasons we're just beginning to understand. They left us an extraordinary legacy, one that could be decoded when we were ready to comprehend its true nature, and thankfully, that time has come. Her website is amazing. It's www.gloria-amendola.com. She's written a ton of books, and they're all really, really great. She has a Tower series, and she has a trilogy of Mary Magdalene revelations from a first century avatar. I've read all 5, and I found them all insightful and informative. They certainly did sort of make me think about a lot of things in a different way. They are exciting books. I know there's another one coming in one of the series. I think it's the Tower series. We're going to have to ask her about that. And she also sponsors trips to sacred sites, which is a fascinating adventure in and of itself. So welcome back, Gloria. I'm so glad you could come again.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. I'm really excited about tonight. It's a subject that's very dear to me.
Well, you know, your books, all of them focus on Mary Magdalene in one way or another. And when I was looking at the material and sort of reading up on the sacred feminine and how it has definitely been a presence in the evolution of the species, if you will, it seems to me that we really haven't covered that aspect of your research and that aspect of your study as well as we could have, should have, would have.
It's such a deep journey. I'm 16 years into walking with the Magdalene, 16 years into from when I first got the nod that she was the woman I was to write the play about, which I did and workshopped in New York City in 2001 prior to 9/11. And it was a very different atmosphere in New York City. And I broke the play up because I really almost didn't want people to know what I was doing. I just wanted to make sure that the writing and the story were strong because I didn't expect people to understand the mystery. That was, almost 3 years, I think, before the Da Vinci Code. And the world was different. I mean, even from 2001, in the last 15 years, we've gone through an enormous amount of change. And the Da Vinci Code was certainly a catalyst for bringing forth that idea on a global scale to people about who Mary Magdalene really was in the Jesus story. And it's captivated me. And the more I keep going, the more I find.
Well, you know, I think one of the lines in your bio that has fascinated me when, as I read it over and over again, I kept coming back to that line. You hint at the true destiny of America and what it is and what the sacred feminine and the goddess and all of that has to do with the true destiny of this country. And I think that's something we should really look into.
Well, the timing is really interesting, and I don't want to get political, but historically, just from the, opinions aside, just from a simple factual basis, we are on most likely the eve of Secretary Hillary Clinton becoming our first female presidential persona, for the Democratic Party. And I say that because, we in the Western world really America really still is looked at as the light in the world. I travel enough to hear people say that, even if they diss America, when push comes to shove, they look to America. And again, not being political, not taking sides or opinions, but on a factual basis, we may have our first Democratic presidential candidate who's a woman. And that is, in whatever you think, again, not political, just keeping it simple and factual, we are integrating the feminine here in America, and it hasn't been easy. And there's a whole host of reasons in history that we can go back on and begin to look back on the saga of Magdalene and the scorned feminine, and really put some big pieces in play and for your audience tonight, I think.
Yeah, I don't, and I don't want to get political. And I do feel that the presence of women in this country are coming slowly into a greater equality. And it's still they got a long way to go. But you can go back to the 1900s where early 1900s where they didn't even have the vote. And
I know.
And so what is fascinating is that in history, and the further back you go, the more profound it becomes, women had greater prominence in all of society. And go ahead.
Well, I think there was a time for the matriarchy, and then there was a time for the patriarchy. And at least the last couple thousand years, from what I can see, the patriarchy has ruled it a certain way. And I think what this rush of the divine feminine and this reawakening is so necessary for us to find our balance again, because in truth, the real alchemy, the great work of ancient Egypt, was to balance the masculine and feminine within. And some say that is the true meaning of the equilateral Templar cross, is that balance of masculine and feminine energy, the alchemy of that, whether it's the two hemispheres of the brain, as they were working with in ancient Egypt, and the pineal gland, and, the biochemical awakening of our physical power, that has been our evolution point. And we've been so out of balance with the masculine, or the patriarchy, I like that word more, having dominated in politics and religion and in certain ways. And it is shifting and it is changing. And I think that's why on some deep karmic level, we're re-examining the Jesus story, because the evidence coming out and the pieces that we can put together about Mary Magdalene, which is a 2,000-year-old story, is very relevant for us to revisit.
Well, absolutely. And even things like the Dead Sea Scrolls bring out more information than has been out there in a very long time. And I totally agree with you. I think that the real focus, the absolute focus, is not a balance of men and women within society. It's a balance of the male and female within the individuals.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Somehow in ancient Egypt, where they got it from, I'm not quite sure, but we certainly can look to a lot of times when you see that cobra, or that serpent being worn in the Egyptian figures right around the third eye, that is an indication and a code that their pineal gland was awakened, that they were awakened, enlightened individuals into certain mysteries, and that can only happen when the male and female energetic electrical currents within the body rise up the spine, hit the pineal gland, allow that substance to be secreted within the body as if it's a code, as if it's a signal saying to the body, okay, now you're ready for something new. It's another stage in our development. And so that is the balance, but we lost it.
Well, I think also that symbol, if you look at the yin yang symbol, it's not meant to, it's with mandalas, with paintings that are circular. The circle denotes or is representative of the whole. And the fact that the yin yang symbol is in a circle, I think people don't understand. It's not a man and a woman in that circle. It's the male and the female within the individual that is in perfect balance. And therefore there is a flow. There is a greater understanding of, bringing the feminine into the male energy so that the male has the emotional balance, bringing the power into the woman so that the woman has, the power to exercise the wisdom that she carries within. I mean, it's something that all of us should be striving for, and certainly activating the pineal gland is one of the ways to go, whether through meditation or whatever activity you so choose. But yeah, I think
it's funny you talk about the circles, because if you look at Magdalene's gematria or gematria, for your listeners, that's like an ancient form of numerology. And so we look at the numbers that were ascribed to the letters that were her title. This comes from the work of Margaret Starbird, but I always bring it up because it's so relevant. So the gematria in the ancient world ascribed a number to a letter, just like if we were to get our names done and get into numerology, that's the conversion we're looking at too. But this was an ancient form. I believe it was both in Hebrew and Greek, and maybe even in another language too. I just don't remember what that was. And what her number comes out to per the title of her name in her time was 153. Which equals 9, and that's a whole, and we're in a 9 year too, so that's a whole interesting aside. But the sacred geometry that is related to that is the Vesica Pisces, and it is the intersection of the two circles, and it's that womb-like middle, that oval shape in the middle where the two circles intersect is the Vesica Pisces, which is related to Magdalene in her numerology. And it's funny, so you're talking about the circle. So if you look at one as masculine and feminine, then the holy of the holies is that womb in the middle. And even in pentagonal geometry and in the great cathedral system, that womb, that shape was prominently featured in cathedrals. So they were trying to tell us something.
Yeah, and it goes way, 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 way back. I just, the further back I went with all of this, into the goddess energy, into the sacred female. I mean, it was bringing a new understanding and wisdom into the wholeness of the people, and it's one that I think we still struggle with today, because you have powerful men and powerful women, and in all of the reading that I did, I kept coming over and over and over into the material that suggested that God was a balance of the masculine and feminine. God was not male or female. God was a combination of the two in complete balance.
Well, I think that's true, and I think this source energy in its holistic nature has to be that way. That's the creative force, right? And whether it's personified in a pantheon of gods or, explained to us in a certain way, the masculine, the logos, the feminine, the receptive, the solar, the lunar, related to masonry and all those cycles and symbols, it tends to dumb it down or meet us where we've been at in our consciousness dualistically. Right, yes. in its dual nature, but that's a separation consciousness. But in its inception, as you were saying, if you go back, it's both, and that's the symbol. That's the meaning of the yin yang symbol. Is that within the masculine is feminine, and within the feminine is masculine, and together that makes the holistic energy of source.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you pull it forward, when you see, that's where I see people not understanding what is going on here today. It's yes, a woman has clinched the Democratic nomination, but that's not what all of this means. I mean, it's not a woman taking over a powerful position that a man has always held. That's not what any of the sacred feminine is suggesting.
That's true, but certainly when I was in the professional world and I dealt with powerful women, what I always observed, and, things have changed a lot in the last decade when I, left that profession for good. But what I always observed with very powerful women is that the way in which they ascended the corporate ladder, if you will, is that they had to assert their masculinity. They had to play a man's game in the corporate or business world, even if they were a woman, and their success was measured by how well they played a masculine game or exerted that more aggressive, more masculine energy. And I know that was the way that it was happening, but it seems to be shifting so that now in the last 10 years, women have ascended enough. There's more to come in powerful situations, and now they've had a chance to establish that trajectory, and now it's a reevaluation of, wait a minute, things are not in balance here. They don't feel right. If you have a woman in charge or involved, or women in charge or involved or doing well in companies, sometimes the dynamics are very different than if it's very male-oriented. And I think we're working through the ripples of all of that imbalance and trying to balance. Well, I think and in the world is really shifting in the way it's expressing itself in the corporate, political, power broker world.
Well, I think one of the things when I look back on all the archetypes, Isis, Gaia, Ishtar, Persephone, I mean, all of these women who, Mary Magdalene, Joan of Arc, she went to war, but they were all really basically trying to bring peace and tranquility and togetherness into the world.
On some level, I think that's true. I think when you get into some of the goddesses like Kali, there was a creative and destructive force, that creation and that destruction, that strength and that power and that ability. And I think in the more primal, ancient of days, the Sophic wisdom, there is that sense of the female having the power to create, to bring life, and the power to destroy and take life. So you have, different sides to that coin. The way I see it having changed is somewhere along the line, the patriarchy, the cycles of time, because we're always tied into the cosmology of our universe. We're always tied in to the cycles of time and to the precession of the equinoxes. Very, very important. Precession and that Earth's axis, it's always tied into how we are in relation to the stars or the night sky, if you will. And that has defined our reality for a very, very long time. And so as the cycles of time have moved through the different epochs in different ages, the astrological, the age of Pisces, right, the age of Aries. We're going into the age of Aquarius. All of that seems to permeate our consciousness on planet Earth, whether we want to admit it or not. We are so not separate. We are so deeply connected to the Earth and the stars. Everything is so connected. And so we see during those times different impulses acting themselves out. And the Aquarian age, which we're approaching, is much more feminine, or if we define it differently, right-brained in its impulse.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you see it? The Magdalene material it seems like it has a life of its own these days. It seems like it is almost on it. The more I look around, the more I see more material on it, and certainly your books are amazing. And now,
Thank you.
Is there another Tower book coming out soon?
There is. I'm actually working very non-linear right now, and it's making me crazy. I'm researching for 3 books in writing across the spectrum. The third Tower is The Tower and the Well, Awakening to the Grail. And then from that and that voice of Yeshua in that novel, the Immortality series, channeling is coming, like the Magdalene series, and I've been researching immortality for 2 years because it's an incredible subject. And I'm also working on a nonfiction book to help the reading audience understand some of the pearls of wisdom in Magdalene's channeled material and teaching, because I'm finding incredible precedents with cutting-edge science that matches up to them, and I'm trying to put that together too. So I usually don't work like that, but right now that's how I find myself working.
Spirit has an amazing way of making its will known when you least expect it.
I know. But I think as you talk about the resurgence of the Magdalene, I think it is critically important for people to understand that over the last 2,000 years, from a religious perspective that was very dominating worldwide until more recently, especially with Catholicism, or if we look at it differently, the power of the Vatican. Mm-hmm. Their money, their power, their influence. It is so critical for us to go back and look at the Jesus story, because we know it's not what we've been taught, and there's so much good information out there about the dying and resurrecting sun gods in the ancient world, of which that was placed over Yeshua or Jesus. And others, Mithras, some say Osiris or Horus. I mean, there's many. And then we have the archetype of the Isis archetype, right? And we have all those, fertile, creative, powerful goddesses. And when we look at Magdalene, she very much follows the Isis lineage, in my opinion. And a lot of other people as well. And so we're re-looking that because it's a story that has dominated our psyche quite incorrectly for 2 millennia. So as we go back and return to it, I believe as a collective, for those who wish to make that correction, they're doing so.
Absolutely.
And that's why the Magdalene is so important, because she is the feminine, not that, Jesus or Yeshua, he was pretty steeped into the feminine energy. He would have understood Isis worship in his time. It was very prevalent. He would have understood the goddess. Even when we have that transmission of knowledge coming through John the Baptist in the River Jordan, that dove descending is Sophia. That is representative of the feminine wisdom teachings, which Magdalene inherently knew because she was her own powerful avatar, and that was her base of understanding. So even if you go back and look at the Nag Hammadi text, not the Dead Sea Scrolls, but the Nag Hammadi text, and you look at the Gospel of Thomas, there's one part in it where Jesus is talking about making the female disciples male. And what people don't often quote is about making the male disciples female. And he's talking again about that balance of male and female energy, that alchemy that goes back to ancient Egypt for sure. And so Magdalene, she was aware of all of that, and she was in her power. And it wasn't a time where women were kind of allowed to be in their power.
Well, yeah, well, the disciples, really didn't accept her.
No.
So that, and she was the one that was supposed to go out and do the teaching, theoretically, according to what I've read anyhow. So,
well, she did go out and do the teaching, and if you spend time in France, especially southern France, Provence and Languedoc in particular, and even in the Ariège region of southwest France, you will find many church murals and statues and symbols and stories where she was the teacher. She absolutely, without a doubt, was the true teacher. So when you look at the esoteric knowledge as opposed to the traditional says, well, Peter was the rock and he formulated the church. But Magdalene was the teacher of the true esoteric tradition, which was the secret school of Jesus.
Well, and according to your books and according to your research, I mean, that Jesus did survive the cross, that they did go into Paris, and that they and their family did thrive and teach.
Yeah. I mean, that's where, not only did I channel that was a tough one for me personally with my Catholic upbringing. I was able to get past the idea, accept the idea that Jesus was married and had a family. That was an easier rewrite for me. But when I began to really accept, when Yeshua would come to me in shamanic journeys and vision and meditation and say, I didn't die on the cross, and I would be so disturbed by that, not because I couldn't process it intellectually, but emotionally and in my psyche, I had been so trained that it just was it was a much harder shift for me to make. And so I really do have compassion for people that are looking at this material now and may be shocked, or maybe they've heard it and they're wrestling with it. But I remember Yeshua saying to me very clearly in my meditative work that you're just going to have to get over it. Whether you can accept I did or I didn't, he would come to me and say, you're just going to have to get over this and move on and just let it work itself out. And I didn't like that answer in my meditation. I was kind of, not happy with that, but I kept going and I wrestled with it, and I made my peace that whatever the truth was, I was going to accept it. And I've come to learn after all these years that it really was recorded in the ancient Essene and Rosicrucian teachings, among other independent sources, that he clearly did not die on the cross.
Yeah, that's in the research that I've done, that's the feeling that I got as well, that it just doesn't make sense. And trying to put a mystery together, 2,000 years after all the facts are gone, is a tough one. But there's a sense of you just know that what's written isn't right, and after this length of time how so much manipulation has been done with a lot of the texts that are out there, it's easier to say, okay, what is written in many cases here is, they say that it's the victors that write the history, and in the creation of a new religion, they wrote the history that supported that religion. And
exactly.
Exactly.
And in my latest research on Yeshua, because that's what I need to do for the third novel, and then into the channeled material, I've looked into the Essene and Rosicrucian information, and I have to be fair, it wasn't only Catholicism that twisted the story, but even when Jesus was, the instructions for his education were deposited, they say, at Mount Carmel at the mystery school there in the Holy Land for his education. By 12, 13 years old, the Essenes took Yeshua to India, because his training required him to understand the teachings of the East as well. Mm-hmm. And by the time he was 14, he was pissing off the priesthood there because he was talking to different castes of people that they did not approve of and teaching them the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And his life was threatened, and they got him out of India, and he went to Tibet. And he ran into some difficulty there, too. So the point being that in the life of Jesus, people need to understand that whether he was in the Holy Land, annoying the priesthood there, I'm making a larger point, or India or Tibet, he was still speaking the truth. He was committed to bringing in a new consciousness. And his partner in that dance was Mary Magdalene, because she was an equal, she was powerful, and she was trained in her own initiatory practices. Thank God the two of them had each other, because they certainly didn't have much acceptance in the world. Maybe the secret school, maybe 100 or so people, but they embodied an incredible and powerful truth in a world where priesthoods were mainly corrupt and were used to holding the power, and they didn't want to give it up, even though they wanted to be in his presence and they wanted to learn from him. When push came to shove and those who were corrupt found out about him, his life was always threatened. So it's not a far cry to understand, it's not a stretch of the imagination to understand if he underwent that as a man in his world at the time. Could you imagine what Magdalene, as a woman who was powerful and understood the mysteries of ancient Egypt and Isis and had no voice in the world, could you imagine what she went through?
No, I can't. And yet in Paris, in France, there are churches, there are statues, there are, it's Magdalene who is worshipped. She's the one they pray to. It's not that Jesus didn't exist, because of course he did, but they seem to be honoring her in France much more and better than any other place in the world, as far as I can tell.
I totally agree with that. And in all my travels worldwide, I have never been to a country that just by the feel of the earth alone, put your feet on the ground in France, take your shoes off, put your feet in the earth, in the sand, in the red dirt, and feel it. And it is feminine in impulse. It is a feminine feeling to it. And it's interesting that impulse, in my opinion, so incredibly corresponds to their veneration of the Magdalene. I think, they go hand in hand.
Now, this goes along with the Templar material as well, but do you find that theory, that philosophy, that feeling, that movement has made a foothold in the United States?
Yes, I absolutely do. From the time when I began to study about her and write about her, it started in the year 2000, nobody seemed to have a clue or even care. And when I workshopped the play called Magdalene's Mine in New York City, nobody cared. The writing was strong, thank God, but did anyone care? No, not at all. But then, for some reason, it started to spread. And when the Da Vinci Code came out, for whatever reason, timing is everything, that catapulted that seed to a massive audience globally. I guess it was an idea whose time has come, right? That old phrase. And boom, all of a sudden, the beauty of a story sent out, and even then, it's still hard to imagine why it caught fire as it did.
Well, it was a good story, but I think it awakened in so many people. I have often felt and still do that fiction writing and movies, usually there are elements in them that are seated there unconsciously to help awaken the consciousness of everyone who sees who sees or reads the work. And even though it's not something that they get outwardly, subliminally, that seed, that trigger is planted within their consciousness. And it does feel to me as though so many people are having those aha moments, and it's like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And they start asking the right questions, or they start searching for the material. So that I think
it's so true. And when I started to talk about the Magdalene and write the play and begin my Magdalene circles, and I mean, I'm at least up to 300 or more that I've done all over the place. I mean, people would show up, but they didn't even know why they were there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was really funny. And I would talk about this stuff, and I'd be so pumped because I'd come back from France or England or the UK or Scotland, with all this passion and this revelation. And it was as if I was dealing with many people, many good people who were doing interesting work. They would look at me, and it was as if a part of them had, that unconscious part had them there, but they didn't know why they were there. And they were listening, but they weren't really fired up. And now, all these years later, as I do these circles, as I do these events, the experiences with Magdalene, the passion, the devotion, the awakening, the recognition, it is not with everyone, but it is inspiring to me because I can see where all the seed work that we did is really fruitful now. There's no stopping it. There is no stopping it at this point.
Well, thank goodness. And don't you think also that over time there is a cycle of awareness and enthusiasm, and then a time of dormancy, and then kind of like dark ages to light ages. It feels as though there are cycles that we go through as a species, and that we're coming into an awakening. Now, I don't know if in our lifetime we'll see the culmination of it, but we can certainly recognize that it's going on out there. And you've spoken about sacred sites around the world, and certainly Rennes-le Chateau is one of the biggies. And
oh yeah,
and certainly the Giza Plateau is another one. What are the ones you talk about, and you've been to many sites here in the United States, just for those who are curious about where are some of the sacred sites that are here in the United States that people can go to and feel the energy in?
Well, sacred, I mean, there are a lot of incredible energies in the American Southwest. And the Anasazi spirit, indigenous spirit is very powerful. But many people believe that the Templars and, of course, the Essenes, and we have some interesting artifacts like the Tucson artifacts, which show their passage. Like once they came to the northeastern United States and Canada, that was really their point of entry. They began to come, move across the country to obviously the West Coast. And I mean, there is even the recording of a Rosicrucian in a Essene community in Carmel, California in the 1600s. There are these imprints. There are Holy Grail mysteries everywhere. So, it's hard for me to pinpoint. I can do it in France so clearly, and I can do it in the UK more clearly with certain sites and then certain cathedrals and following the Templars and the Guardians of the Grail, as I call them. Uh-huh. When we get to America, the energy or the way in which they used that arcane knowledge to work with the spirit of place is a little bit different. So let me give an example. When our founders were citing Washington, D.C., it is alleged that they were looking for the God meridian, which is on the 77th longitudinal degree. Uh-huh. And that was so Washington, D.C. was seated as a spiritual center with goddess principles. So how does that play out? Well, they used those 40 posts in a diamond shape to hammer out those boundaries, right, of the District of Columbia.
Right.
Columbia herself is a goddess, right? They were learning in the salons in Paris and in France the mysteries, which included the Magdalene and the Divine Feminine. And I think I may have already said that it's believed that Jefferson and Washington definitely had connections, bloodline connections, if you will, both in family, lineage, and we could go off on that too. So while they may have been flawed men, especially Jefferson, although be it brilliant, they were given a destiny to bring the goddess energies and veil them, but nonetheless incorporate them. And their Freemasonic brotherhood really helped to do that in Washington. So if you ask of where was there sacred energy intended in this country, we can look to Washington, D.C., and you can go there and find a lot of nods to the mystery and to the feminine and to the great work and the balancing of the masculine and the feminine. But then look at D.C. today. And it's such a beautiful city, but look at it. Look at how the dark and the corruption has taken it from its purpose.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So,
wasn't Franklin also involved in some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And he was a grand master of different lodges in terms of being a Freemason. We can't definitively say that Jefferson was a Freemason, but we can with Ben Franklin.
Well, yeah,
and he actually gets very close to, we can place him as a grand master in Carcassonne in the Walled Le Cité, in Carcassonne in France. And that's only about a 35-minute drive from Rennes-le-Château. And it's believed that he was in Rennes-le-Château as well. So we can definitely place him there. And they were getting their instructions of what to do to create this, what we call a New Jerusalem or a New Atlantis. And it was based on matriarchal goddess principles, but they were so arcane that most people had no clue.
Yeah, I knew that he started this journey in France, from what I understand.
Yeah, he was pretty beloved in Ben Franklin in France. He was quite the character. But even Jefferson, we do know from his, and I've said this before, his website and some of his travels, that when he does go to France, he does go to the Languedoc region where Rennes-le-Château is, and he does write, I think, to his daughter and say, it's good to be back in the land of corn, wine, and oil. And that is clearly a Masonic reference. So he's including that it's good to be back here.
Wow.
In these movies.
It's just, when you start to look at history with different eyes, once you get, beyond what school has taught you and find that most of it's not true, it is a very exciting journey to take a look, especially with the way they laid out Washington, their intentions. These men, the founders of our country were deists. They weren't really religiously oriented, yet they were extraordinarily spiritually oriented.
Exactly. You hit on such an important point for people to understand. People go around and blindly say, well, this country was founded on Christian principles. No, it really wasn't. And if you look at the founding fathers, they were deists. If you look at Jefferson, he rewrote the Bible. And he, to a Jefferson Bible, and he took out certain references that he absolutely did not believe in. And he had great reverence and respect for Jesus, but they knew. I have a slide in one of my presentations. It is so mind-boggling. Let me see if I can find it really quick. But it's about his understanding of who the Catholic Church was. In his time, and I could imagine if this kind of comment was made today by the press, with the press picking it up, they would have had a field day. But these are things, I think I found it here. Let me see. Okay. This is Thomas Jefferson, and this is a quote of his. And he says, he's talking about, let's see if it's prefaced in the slide before. Let me just get back to that. No, it's not. Okay. So I took this quote out and put it in a presentation I recently did up in Salem, Massachusetts. The clergy converted the simple teachings of Jesus into an engine for enslaving the world and adulterated by artificial constructions into a contrivance to filch wealth and power to themselves. These clergy, in fact, constitute the real Antichrist.
Very interesting.
And that was Jefferson.
Well, yeah, good point.
So, so what they were doing, and people will say to me as a rebuttal, they'll say, well, Jefferson owned slaves, and Jefferson was a flawed man, and you speak of them as if they were so enlightened. And I say, no, take a step back. They were receiving instructions from, let's call it a higher power for the moment, and they had a mission, and they were to create this country and create documents that would basically allow people to be free so that they could spiritually evolve. Did they understand what they were being given? Did they understand what they were really doing when they were, right in the middle? You know how it is when you're right in the middle of something? It's hard to keep the vision. It's hard to keep everything together. I mean, 16 years ago when I started on my journey with the Magdalene, it was a passion. But did I know what I was doing half of the time? No. And when I even first started Magdalene Circles, I didn't have a clue what I was supposed to do. And I would meditate and it would come. And whether it made sense to me or not, I stuck with it. But I had no clue at times what I was even doing. Now looking back, I see the beauty and the wisdom of what was created. So, I'm not saying that they had it all figured out on a personal level because they were evolving too, but they were receiving instructions from a higher power, and they did create something very special.
Oh, absolutely. And they to the best of their ability, they laid a foundation. And that's what Freemasons do. They lay the foundation. And future generations will build upon it, hopefully. I think that we may have wandered off the path here and there a few times, but I truly believe that there are sincere people out there that are still striving with the same cause and the same purpose to create something that has, beauty and power and wisdom and faith and it's every now and then you step back and you say, oh my goodness, this went awry, but maybe that's part of the whole project. Maybe going off the track for a while makes it, creates the need to go back on track and move forward again.
Well, it could be, and I may have said on the last show that we did in April, I may have said this, but it bears repeating. According to an astrologer friend of mine, I had asked him, what does the astrological chart of America look like? And he said, we are at a crossroads where we're either going to return to our founders' vision of this country, or we're going to go deeper into decay. And maybe it'll be a little bit of both. Maybe it's not that, black or white. Maybe there's a lot of gray areas. But the only way in which we restore the vision and move forward is by resurrecting the feminine understanding, the feminine wisdom teachings, because that's the only thing that gives balance and sustainability to our world at this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, maybe the element of the Phoenix Rising comes in here too. Sometimes in order for us to go further, we need to sort of be reborn out of the ashes of the old. And we're looking at what we can see physically, but I know for sure that consciousness is changing and shifting. And in that shift of consciousness is, magic is happening. Now whether that consciousness shifting is, and it's not necessarily taking place within the quote unquote leaders. It's taking place within the masses, which is really even more important.
It is, and it's more important. It's more sustainable, and it's really the way change takes place.
Yeah, I think that so often we look at those people we have put in power and expect them to do for us instead of us starting to do for ourselves.
I think so, and I think if you look at the whole GMO question and the whole organic question and, being poisoned as opposed to eating healthy, I mean, I think that a lot of people are driving change by their pocketbook. So it's a silent revolution going on. In other words, you used to have to go to maybe one store in the past to find organic produce and more innovative products. And now you can go in almost every supermarket and find an organic section. It may not be fabulous, but it's there. Mm-hmm. And you find more and more products, going to a cleaner version of themselves, and that's because people are demanding it, and by their pocketbooks, they're driving change, and I think that's phenomenal. I think where we're stuck is politics and religion, and in America, we are having, the ride of our lives with this particular, and we haven't had one like this in a long time, in terms of the way we're viewing our candidates, what's being reported, the shadow side is really rearing its ugly head, and we're looking at that, and all the players are playing the part, but it's we the people that really is going to make all the change. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, I found in just talking to people. Normally, when there is an event like the election, people just, I'm going to go this way or I'm going to go that way. And I'm finding that more and more people are not only educating themselves, which is so fabulous, but
yep.
but they are beginning to take a look at, they're not swallowing they're not swallowing things whole hog. They're really questioning. They're really looking at different things. And, not only the different candidates, but the television and the radio and the newspaper ways of reporting things. And they're not taking things and just going with what's said. They're looking into things. They're reading books. They're researching. And their own moral value codes are coming into question as well. Not so much you can't judge another person, but you can take a look at where they are coming from and what they have, what their actions have resulted in, and really taking a step back and saying, is this the kind of person I want to be, a reflection of what I have inside of me? And it's wonderful. It's masterful. I don't like the riot stuff, but I think that's politically, generated anyhow. I don't think that the public would do that unless there were people out there, stirring them up and making them want to be as chaotic as they are. But the populace as a whole is becoming more and more awake than they ever have been before, and I think it's a very, very exciting time.
Oh, I think it's getting more and more exciting. It's a bit chaotic and crazy at times, but it is exciting, and I'm overwhelmed at times. I'm hopeful. Even with all the craziness, I'm hopeful. I'm glad I'm on the path I'm on, and I've had time to really integrate and spend all that time questioning, and I go out there and I teach and I do my thing, and people are coming from so many different pathways, but you're right, they're questioning. They don't believe in authority. They know they've been lied to in religion and politics and governments and stuff like that, and that is good. That is good. And even if if people are angry about that, that's okay too, because that anger can be used creatively. And I think there's enough people out there who realize that. And, and then there's the dark side of it too. But, evolution is a sloppy mess. It's not, a perfect science. It's not beauteous. There's many different people in the world. I think the last thing, and maybe as we go into the second half of the show tonight, we could talk about why religion is so entrenched and, if you will, kind of against women, especially the power source, which is the Vatican. I'd like to talk about that in what I see that they did to Magdalene in the Jesus story, and how that rippled out through time a bit, and how they seem to be the last ones
the last
that are going to hold on to their power.
Yeah, I think that's great. We're real close to the music starting to play here. So I I have clocks all over the place, and I know about when the break is coming, and Sean has given me the high sign that it's coming, but I don't know which clock I pay attention to. So we'll just, yes, I think you're right, and I would love to go into that material as well, because I have very strong feelings about that. But let's hit religion.
Wow, what a subject, huh? Yeah. I did, while we were on break, I did look at another presentation. And just in case, because I don't know if we've ever covered this material, but just to understand, you were talking earlier about the victors in history writing our history. Mm-hmm. And what was really recorded. And when you go back and you really start to look at history and tear it apart, a lot of it, and especially as we go back further, was erroneous. It was incorrect. So believe it or not, in the New Testament of the Bible, there is no mention of Mary Magdalene ever being a prostitute. And yet, even to this day, and certainly for a long time, that's how people came to know her as being a prostitute, but no mention. And we know it came from Pope Gregory. It was about 590 Common Era, and he made this decision to conflate two stories in the stories that got included in the Bible. There were many that didn't, and many texts didn't. And he reduced the confusion, and he just conflated the story and created his own narrative. Whether it was intentional or not, it stuck. It stuck for so long that even when a papal bull, like a directive that comes down from the Pope, from the Vatican, was issued in 1969, officially saying Mary Magdalene is not a prostitute, how many people ever heard that? How many people ever got it?
It's still being she's still being portrayed that way from the pulpit.
Yes. Yep. And I think, if I had to garner a guess based on all my years of research and all the things I've seen and all the people I've met, I've come to the conclusion, and I've really took my time coming to this conclusion, that it was deliberate. It wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, because in changing the Jesus story into a religion that could be bought and sold, the Council of Nicaea, Constantine, changing the story, banning the books, it was, then they just completely reversed the story, and then they took Mary Magdalene and they stripped her of her power, because what title to a person is more powerless for a woman than being a prostitute, right?
Right. Well, and it's funny, because even Constantine, his mother, traveled all over the place gathering relics and things like that. They were fascinated with the relics. By the way, did you want to take calls, because we do have some calls coming in?
Oh, sure.
Okay, Sean. Hi, 860. You're on the air with us.
Oh, am I? Wow.
Yes, you are.
So, am I able to ask a question?
You certainly can.
What I want to know is, am I wasting my time in the relationship that I'm in?
Oh, I'm so sorry. We're not doing readings tonight.
Oh, you're not?
Nope, but thank you for calling.
Okay. So how can I listen into the show, though? Because I can't figure it out now that you changed the station.
Well, if you go to Revolution Radio, the website, you can hit the chat button, and that will pull up the recordings of the shows, and you can listen right there.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for calling. Okay, Gloria.
Yep.
It's sorry about that.
That's okay.
You know how it is when you're a psychic, people always want to slip a question in.
I get it.
She had a good question. Are people wasting their time with their relationships to the church? Should they be looking at a more spiritual way of venerating and being enlightened by the teachings of Mary and Jesus?
I guess I have a couple of responses to that. And I like to make this distinction when I talk to people, because there are people who are attached to their religion, which I think, by the way, as a collective, we are moving away from. I think the statistics basically show that. But for those who still are, they need to look at what that relationship with the church is like. And if you're looking at the Catholic Church in particular, having come through that system, they do not treat women equally. And I don't know why any woman would want to be bound by hierarchical rules that want power over women. Doesn't fly in my book. That's not the way Jesus would have wanted it, because he loved women. He understood their power. It makes no sense to me. And also too, if you can bear to look at it, the Catholic Church is full of doctrine and policies that are not based on the teachings of Jesus. Nor on the teachings of the Essenes in the Way at all. So attaching yourself to an institution that is deeply flawed and has sought to control people and manipulate them, why would you set yourself up for that kind of relationship? Me personally, I can't do it. Maybe somebody else can.
Well, the mores of the time when Constantine was creating the church, women didn't have a very large, they had no power during that particular time frame. They were basically, a necessary whatever in order to perpetrate your genetic pool. But other than that, they didn't have any power. So in creating the church as they did, it was all males.
Well, that's true, and therein began the great imbalance in our world. And people, especially in Europe, and even in France, they still struggle with this, because there are pockets of Catholicism, in certain areas. It's more Latin America now, where the church has any real strong foothold. But people still struggle with this stuff, and because the Vatican is in Rome, they feel its proximity much closer than we do. We're lucky to have this separation of church and state written in to our code, and it helps us. It's helping us, actually, I think, evolve spiritually. So when you begin to look back at all of that and see the machinations that were created, I mean, we were talking about the Roman Empire and its decline, reorganizing and becoming, basically, give or take, the Holy Roman Catholic Church. And they weren't fond of, I don't think the Romans were, that fond of women necessarily either. I don't think they had a lot of power. But I think what really, the point I'm trying to make is that the Vatican has always known the truth, but they chose not to embrace it. And their mercenaries killed the descendants very deliberately. So let's go back and look at France and Europe, the Inquisition, right?
Okay.
If you look at, there was a widespread belief in medieval times that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were married and had children.
Right.
It was prevalent. It was probably like it is today. I don't know. I can't compare it, but there was a widespread belief. Now, Louis the 11th of France, he ruled between 1461 and 1483. Louis the 11th of France. He believed the French royal family descended from the Magdalene. The mythical Merovingian warriors in that whole lineage believed they descended from Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and they were known to have mythical powers. The Cathars believed that they were married, and these people were attacked by whom? They were attacked by the King of France and the Vatican, and they systematically perpetrated genocide on a race of people who they called heretics, who just understood a deeper truth. And if we think ISIL or Daesh is brutal today, you need to go back and look at the Inquisition, some of the records and practices. They were heinous, and they really went after women.
They did. They did.
And it kept going on and on. After the Inquisition was over, lots of other things still kept being perpetrated, and it was primarily perpetrated against women who showed any ability for the divination arts, for the understanding of herbs, for the connection to the pagan practices connected to the earth. I mean, they systematically perpetrated heinous crimes on women for a very long time. And you have to ask yourself why.
Even look at Joan of Arc. I mean, she, talked to angels, and they did not treat her well towards the end there.
No, they didn't treat her well. I mean, Joan of Arc is a whole nother story. She has a very Christ-like mission, but it's actually believed in parts of France and in certain circles. And I don't want to say too much here because I need to go a little further in my research with this, but I can tell you that there are alternate stories of the true story of Joan of Arc, that she wasn't just this child out in the country necessarily, but that she was the illegitimate child of the queen at the time. And she was schooled in the ways of the royal court. So when she goes into the, to the court of the king, the royal court, to talk trash, if you will, somebody was schooling her. And she was great and set up. So her story has never even been properly told.
Yeah, I suspect that, and I've heard, here and there, just fragments that she did not die when she was supposed to have died, that she did live on.
That's absolutely, yes. There's an understanding in France about that, and there is supposed to be archival evidence of her much later on in her life making requisition to travel to a royal ceremony. Might have been a coronation in Germany. Not positive. It's a little sketchy. I'm still trying to track down all this stuff. But, making requisition to travel to another country. Her story has not been told. But was she set up? Absolutely. Did certain powers betray her? Yes. And why? Think about the power that she had.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it had to be, for her, frightening and yet amazing. When you have that kind of power, when you are in communication with a higher power, and you know it, and it's so many people who do have that connection. It's sort of like, so it's sort of like knowing something so amazingly phenomenal that you just want to shout it from the rooftops, and yet knowing that you can only share it with a select few, or you will be considered crazy and be put away.
Yeah, or you will pay a price, that's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, if it happened to Jesus, it's going to happen to anyone, right? Anyone. And so, there again, when we talk about this relationship to the church, if you think about it, and I've said this many times, but I don't think, it's something that, again, bears repeating because of the programming we've all gone through. If Jesus was truly the Son of God, right, in that understanding, and the people could kill him, what subliminal message does that send? That even if the Son of God, acts out of control, speaks, spoke his truth, did what he did, the powers that be in any given epoch of time in history can kill them.
Yeah, no,
that's the archetypal presence on the dark side that we've received without even knowing it. Because really, shouldn't the Son of God be all powerful?
Yeah, he was, and yet he didn't use it against anyone. Come on, he was here for peace and love, not warfare.
Right. And he was here to enlighten people, not to redeem them, but to reveal a pathway of initiation. And how, again, you raise that male and female energy based on the ancient systems, the systems of ancient Egypt and resurrection rituals, and how you woke up the biochemistry of the body and you became very powerful, very co-creative. And those are the teachings that we've lost. Now, most people can process the idea that religious institutions would not want their population to be empowered, because that wrecks the hierarchy of their entrenched power and certainly in case of the Vatican, their wealth.
Oh, yeah. I wanted to bring up, I wanted to ask you about Lourdes, because, here again is Magdalene presenting herself to children, and, it does seem that for some reason Paris, obviously it was because the Magdalene energy is there, but though all of those prophecies have not been shared, have they?
Are you talking about the Fatima prophecies?
The Fatima, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, the Lourdes is Mother Mary, and the Fatima prophecies, I believe it's the third one that was never revealed. I don't know that I have this right, but what I will tell you is that what I've been told is that the one that wasn't disclosed was the prophecy about the demise of the church. Can I prove that? No, I can't prove it, because we're talking about the three secrets of Fatima. I think that's what you're referring to.
Yes. I had a friend who was a priest, and I asked him about, the prophecies and why, what it was that was so bad that the Pope wouldn't let it go. And he said, well, I can tell you what it was. And, this is going to seem so off color. And I said, what? He said it was the bill for the Last Supper.
Yeah.
But I don't think the church is ever going to let it out. You take a look at the Vatican and the material that they have stored there, the secrets, my God, the material that they have under lock and key that they aren't sharing with the world. Why? Except that it proves that they are a fake, a facade, and that they've been lying to us for thousands of years.
They've been lying to us, and their whole Jesus story is completely incorrect. And, not only is it incorrect, not only did they destroy the Magdalene's reputation and try to strip her of her power, what they didn't plan on was that the people would rise up and the people would say, we know the truth. And nobody embodied that more and especially in southwest France, although the Cathars were in other parts of Europe. But nobody embodied that more than the Cathars. And when you go to the Rennes area or the greater Languedoc and Ariège, actually, they have a word. It's called OC, O-C, and it's a very defiant yes. And that's why in the fires of Montségur, the parfaits, the perfected one, the priesthood, the enlightened ones, they came down off that pog, off that mountain, and they said, we would rather die in your fires than live a lie. And they believed in the alternate story, and they knew how they believed much more than just the corruption of the priesthood. They understood its evil and its dark side. And Jefferson was basically saying the same thing, calling them the Antichrist. I mean, that's pretty powerful.
Oh, I'd say so. Especially since Antichrist really isn't in the Bible, and yet for some reason it seems to have sunk into the vernacular that it is prophesied there will be an Antichrist. As far as I understand it, there to me, an Antichrist is someone who is against the teachings of Jesus, the true teachings of Jesus, and that would. Well,
I mean, I think that again, from the Vatican, from the high up, from the high places, I don't believe that they ever truly had that as part of their agenda. I believe it was a money-making operation that was put forth by Constantine and then those who followed in the Roman Empire to just control. Religion controls people. And, the Romans were good at certain things, and they adapted some of their practices. I mean, we know that bloodline descendants were ruthlessly hunted down, murdered. I mean, when this story finally breaks, and so many of us have dedicated so many years to, even just trying to get the facts, we've had to pull them out of thin air and, go through hoops because they literally gathered everything. They destroyed it. They have it in the secret archives. They make a joke of it. They say, oh, that's just silly. I mean, please, we're looking at a much darker aspect, and that darker aspect feared the power of the feminine.
Yeah, it seems to me that things, either politics or religion or both or any corporate anything, it's sort of like, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think that's what we're seeing in so many places. Somebody in the chat room said perhaps things are more complicated, multiple gods, multiple dimensions, and a lot of soap opera among them all. It's true, and yet that which was preached by Jesus and Mary was so simple and so easy.
Well, we have to understand it was, but we need to make a distinction. The exoteric teachings, the outward to the public exoteric teachings of Jesus were simple because they had to be. Because if you understood his audience at the time, they had to be parable, they had to be story, it had to be something that the people could understand. In the inner circle, in the esoteric, of which it is believed that the secret school numbered of about 120, those teachings were based on the mystery school teachings, based on ancient Egypt and other systems, certainly Eastern systems that Yeshua would have, picked up in his teenage and early adult years in his studies abroad, and then of course Magdalene with her deep understanding of the mysteries, especially connected to the goddess. So in their inner circle, they were actually wielding very powerful teachings. They understood the teachings of Pythagoras, Isis. They were very sophisticated and very smart and very powerful. So there really was, at that time was a dual world going on for them. So love is always the central theme. and that's awesome. And that's what was really put forth in the exoteric. But make no mistake, in the inner circle, they were working with very powerful concepts that they understood. And that's what they were working with to affect change on a consciousness level through the dimensions, through the grids. They understood all that.
Yeah, and the esoteric, the things that the elements, the modalities that we have that are a part of us and that we have access to if we go about it in the right way are magical. I mean, they would blow your mind. I mean, the things that Jesus did, he said, all this and more will you do. He meant it. And
he did mean it. And I think the lovely part of where we find ourselves in our development is that science is attacking some of the big questions or challenged by them, and they are finding, science and spirituality are merging much more than religion and spirituality.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I try to always say to people, there is religion and spirituality can go hand in hand, or they can be separate from one another. It is, one is an outgrowth of the other, certainly, but you don't have to be a fanatic religious person in order to be spiritual. And, the opposite is true as well. So it's a matter of, to me, personally, seeking the spiritual aspects that are carried within and understanding how to access them, how to utilize them, how to incorporate them into your physical reality so that your physical reality expands beyond this dimension.
Well, take this as, let me paint a picture for your listening audience to get a sense of the exoteric and esoteric and what that specifically looked like. Let's say Jesus and his disciples, Mary Magdalene, the women that were with him, their group. Let's say they were in a particular area and they were teaching and they were doing their healing work, and Jesus as the main speaker would have told his story and his parables. That was what they presented to the public, if you will. And that presented all sorts of situations that came up. When they were in their esoteric group and they were using their spiritual power and expanding their consciousness, they would tone prayers in the form of a chant, utilizing vowel sounds. So in my groups I've been doing vowel sounds of the chakras, not the seed sound, the vowel sound. And then I later found this. They were doing that because they understood that chanting the vowel sounds had a sympathetic effect upon the consciousness and nervous system of the patient. So if they were doing their healing, because remember the Essenes were great healers in ancient Egypt. They were the therapeutes or the therapeutai. They were legendary. And so as this knowledge passed along, in the inner circle, they were working with very powerful energies as they were training themselves to be healers. So they may have gone out into the public and healed, but people didn't know how they were healing, right? We're never given that information. Why? Because it was powerful and it was secretive and it was veiled. But that was one tool they were using to relax the nervous system. So when they applied healing technique, the body, the DNA was more relaxed. Mm-hmm. That's just one thing. Another thing we know they were doing is they were working with Aramaic as a language. And Aramaic is considered the language of the heart. And they would actually, let me paint this picture. Let's say the Essenes like to gather in caves a lot. So they would gather, and let's say there were 50 or 100 of them. They would begin chanting not only the vowel sounds, they would begin chanting the Aramaic heart prayers. And they knew that they had to work with the root chakra and the heart chakra. And they knew they were working with certain primal fears and programming. They knew this. I'm positive they knew this. I could tell by the way they were working with the Aramaic heart prayers. I am safe. I am unconditional love, radiating that energy through the sound, through that sound of the language and the chanting and the speaking of it, so that they were creating an energy field.
Mm-hmm.
And they were moving the fears of that root chakra and opening it up and moving it into the heart, where we know the magic happens with a lot of the healing techniques. It's that toroidal field of the heart that is what we're beginning to unlock, the electromagnetic field and the power of it. So in their private time, they were masters, and they were teaching others around them to be masters, and they were working with incredible, powerful knowledge. And the powers that be knew this stuff.
Well, it would seem to me that those techniques had to have passed down through time to this generation.
Yes, and mostly they were passed down through the Essenes.
Well, then wouldn't you see clubs, groups of these people around the world utilizing these skills and talents still? I mean, wouldn't it be something that was still accessible today if you knew where to look?
Well, you can look to the Rosicrucian teachings for some of this. And some of it's becoming more available. It's like Freemasonry. You in the past, nobody would tell you what any of the rituals or the degrees were about, and you were threatened the oaths of secrecy. And some of that still holds true today with Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism. But there's plenty of people coming forth. But I think, in my experience, what I've observed is that you have always a teaching, whether it's secret or not, but you have to match the teaching with your personal power.
Mm-hmm.
And that power only comes from initiation and clearing and transmuting and transforming. The great work in ancient Egypt, alchemy, personal spiritual alchemy, and the pathway of the Grail stories. It was all about personal alchemy and how, you have to merge with the feminine energy if you're a male to complete that process within yourself. That's what's encoded in those stories. There's a couple different levels, but that is by far the most important teaching, and it's veiled, it's secretive. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that even if you find a book of secrets or a book of secret knowledge, if you don't understand it, you can't really utilize it. And I think with the teachings of Yeshua in the inner circle, you had to match the understanding of it mentally or intellectually with your own spiritual power that went hand in hand.
So, in other words, I have come to believe, this week, this is my theory, it may change next week, but my theory is that the quote unquote Hall of Records that Toth speaks of, that we've heard bandied about, is truly encoded within each person's individual DNA. And
I totally agree with that. Agree with that.
Okay, so maybe I'll keep this theory for a month or so. So that the journey, the initiation you're talking about, is not one you go externally to seek, but it is an internal journey into yourself and your self-awareness and your higher consciousness, where you have access, where you can trigger the activation of these different strands of DNA that are not at this moment vibrating, turned on, whatever you want to call it. We don't use but at least one pair of the strands of DNA that we carry within us. All the rest of them, the scientists call garbage DNA, and I think they're the priceless pieces of DNA that we've all been looking for externally for generations.
I agree with that, and I think when we were talking earlier about activating the masculine and feminine energies within us, and again, that being encoded in the quest for the Holy Grail, is that if our body systems are set up so that if we do the work of remembering, awakening, transmuting old behavioral patterns, old thought patterns, old beliefs, really being spiritually responsible for our journey, and we raise the Kundalini energy, and we raise it up, and we go past that sacral chakra and the sexual impulse, and we keep raising it up into the brain, into the pineal gland. The pineal gland is the third eye. It's the eye of inner sight. But it's believed that when that truly gets pinged, a substance emerges, oozes, and from it. And to me, my belief is that it signals to the body. It's an inherent system that says, okay, your body recognizes, ooh, that's been released. The person is ready, so we're going to now go to the next lesson, the next level of experience, because we got the signal. Mm-hmm. Okay, they're ready. We got the signal. And I mean, we know the body is a complex organism of messages, in the cells, in the brain, even there's electrical impulses and flow. It is an incredible system. So when you talk about the DNA, the Akashic record being encoded within us, I believe it is, but in our own protection, basically circulatory and nervous systems, we have to go step by step. And that's what the mystery schools did to properly to prepare the human body and its corresponding energy fields as it's ready to take on more conscious awareness. Because if we're not clear and we just go try and take it on because, think about the last Indiana Jones movie with the crystal skull and the character that Cate Blanchett played as a German Nazi woman, seeking the skull. And at the very end, when they place the skull with the other skulls, in that chamber, mm-hmm. She wants to know everything, but she's not really ready to know everything. She just thinks she is. So the skull sends forth the transmission, and it kills her because it's too much. She can't handle it.
Well, it seems to me that we carry within us ancient wisdoms, and it's a matter of using them, learning them, reawakening them by sometimes study. Sometimes you read a book and you suddenly remember something you already knew. Material seems very, very familiar, and so it's easy to assimilate it. But these. There are so many schools out there that it's scary. I'll teach you how to become an ascended master. I'll teach you how to see into the fourth dimension. And the reality is we are our own teacher. And if we go to our own personal internal source, it seems to me that it will take us along this pathway in the manner in which it is best for our spirit at this time. So no two people will do this in the same way.
They won't do it in the same way, but I guarantee you that we, based on our biocircuitry in the human body, we have to, and I know this from my own journey, from my studies, and from what I've learned from other quiet masters, is that if Jesus came to reveal a pathway of initiation, to prepare us for revelation, conscious remembering. Magdalene says in my trilogy that our brains are wired for full remembrance and that Jesus had it and that we too will have it when we're ready. We're just taking, more steps on the evolutionary ladder to get to that point, because as much as it's spiritual, it's biological. It's physical. That's the ascension, spirit and matter, that union, the masculine and the feminine. And so, these are very, very powerful teachings. And there was great wisdom in some of the mystery schools in how we do this. And we have to treat ourselves very carefully and support ourselves with proper nutrition and sunlight and all that business that we hear about and, are learning about in order to support that light, in order to support that spiritual and physical union and that ascension. And that does, however you choose to do it, it does take time and it does take steps. And maybe in generations to come it will happen quicker. But where we are right now, we still need those steps. We have to be careful because it is full-on energy.
Yeah, and I've seen people that have tried to rush the process, and inevitably they go to the dark side.
Because they make themselves very vulnerable.
Well, Adolf Hitler is a great example of this.
I agree with that.
He went to the dark side, and he went for the shortcuts, and they totally warped his mind.
They did, and it's really funny too because Hitler spent he sent his cronies to southwest France, Montsegur in particular, to retrieve the secrets of the Grail, the Atlantean power tools, whatever we want to call them. He was looking for all of that, and there are very intense energies there, and they can go either way at times because it's depending on the choices you make. And those energies are, especially in Rennes Le Chateau, which I know you love, talking about the Rennes mystery. The Rennes Le Chateau mystery is so steeped in the dark and the light, so it's really creation energy because it's got both. But depending on sometimes time of day, it's very fluid. One becomes more dominant than the other, and I've seen so many people, walk up to that village and they think they've got it all figured out, and they walk right into the dark energy. And I mean, that's very powerful dark energy, and things happen, and it's not pretty. So, we have to really be aware of this as we make our progress in our own spiritual evolution as a species, and I think the real pathway of ascension comes through certainly the teachings of Yeshua, the hidden teachings, and they are a compilation of probably, many systems, which is what he studied. And, I think where we find ourselves now, we have to find a way to commit to that pathway more and more because artificial intelligence is gaining tremendous speed and acceleration in how it's taking over that consciousness evolution, and that just doesn't quite feel right to me.
Yeah, no, it doesn't to me either. You've mentioned the Holy Grail a number of times, and it's been touted to be Mary Magdalene. It's been touted to be the cup that he used at the Last Supper. It's been touted to be a number of different things, and I'm beginning to feel that it's probably all and none of those things. Is the Holy Grail really possibly an awareness within each and every one of us that we're looking in the wrong places for it when we're looking externally and we should be looking internally? Is the Holy Grail actually a thing you could see and touch, or is it a concept you must embrace?
Well, I'll read in my Mary Magdalene Revelations from a First Century Avatar. This is volume 3, and somebody submitted the question, what is the Holy Grail? So I will read her response, which is very short. Magdalene says, and this was channeled from her, in response to what is the Holy Grail, she says, the Holy Grail has been many things to many people throughout time. But the common thread in all of the stories is that the Holy Grail is a life force. It is a certain kind of energy, It transforms, it heals, but it can kill and destroy. It can bring enlightenment or drive someone mad. It can expand you to be as big as the heavens or shrink you down to the size of an ant.
Okie doke. So that basically says it's all things to all people, just about. I mean,
well, what she's saying, it's a life force. It's a life force energy. And how you interact with that life force energy is according to your vibration, right? Is according to your choices. Is according to, are you from the heart and are you from love? Are you, steeped in the ego? Are you in fear or dark energies? It's a life force, and it's going to be interpreted or come through you based on the codes and the frequencies that your energy fields are emitting. So it's a life force.
So people who are chasing down, a box with angels on it, and magic stuff inside are really chasing their tails, because and that answer, the answer you gave, makes more sense to me than the fact that there is a box that can kill people if they touch it, or they say that the Holy Grail is in Ethiopia, and they don't say what it is. They just say, the Ark of the Covenant is in Ethiopia. So
right.
So those seeking the Grail, well, even in Parsifal, the Grail was not a thing; it was a concept.
Yeah, and ultimately it's a life force energy. And so she says it's been many things to many people. So the guardians of the Grail throughout time have crafted stories and ideas, and people have taken them on, and it's been this big mystery, what is the Holy Grail? It's this question, and ultimately, she's saying it's a life force energy. And even in the Grail stories, again, as you look at them, it's about the male, in the story seeking his female counterpart. So we can bring it back to the alchemy of the masculine and feminine energies. But at that time, and this has always been the beauty of the hidden guardians, is that they've had to work with either the archetypes or the stories or the concepts at their time, at any given century or period or age, in order to disseminate a story that the people would accept and would take on. And that's how information is encoded. It's just like in the Freemasonic rituals. They talk about Enoch. They talk about certain ancient stories. And most of the people don't have a clue really what they're memorizing. They're just memorizing. This is like when you're in school. You have to pass the test, so you memorize. And you don't often really know the material. You just memorize it. But what a brilliant way to keep the seeds of an ancient story intact worldwide by making your initiates do that. I mean, it's a very dumbed-down version, but it's what was crafted during its time that would make sense to the people.
But doesn't it also subliminally implant a wisdom that will find its time at some point in time? I mean, that's subliminal stuff. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I can remember when I pledged a sorority, we had to learn the Greek alphabet, and we sang it. And to this day, I can sing the Greek alphabet. So that something that you have to memorize, something that becomes so natural to you, you can spout it out, without thinking, means that it has hit a level of consciousness deeper than, what just pure memory is. So that by that implantation, you are literally seeding your consciousness with a philosophy that you may not consciously understand, but subconsciously it's incorporated into the totality of who and what you are.
I know, isn't it extraordinary?
It's programming.
Yeah,
It's really,
Yeah, it is programming, and I mean, I think there were certain ways in which, at least, like take for instance the Gothic cathedrals that the Templars funded and the Masons built throughout. Well, let's say throughout France, but throughout Europe. Some of the most extraordinary ones are in France, and they're extraordinary even to this day. If you look at the Great Chartres Cathedral outside, to the west of Paris. That in itself is, volumes of books, but basically, and not in its inception, because Bernard of Clairvaux would have had more of the sacred geometry of the temple, of the cathedral, which was pretty much based on pentagonal geometry, the star, the five-pointed star, Venus, the feminine. That's what they were veiling there. But as time went on, they put in those beautiful stained glass windows with that famous Chartres blue color. It's so mesmerizing. And so what they did for the people is they told stories in the windows, because the people couldn't read, they couldn't write. Most of the population was illiterate, and yet in the Great Chartres Cathedral, one of the first windows you see when you walk in the main entrance to the right is the Magdalene window. And it's highly heretical, but they put it in such beautiful color and story, and so the mind takes it in, even though the people may not have understood it, but it was an initiatory pathway, and they were bright enough through using the secret knowledge they had to learn how to use light, sound, and color to stamp or program a memory onto our consciousness as well.
Yeah, it's amazing. It really
It is amazing when you begin to really see who were these people and how the hell did they know all this stuff.
And how brilliant they were when you look at what the Catholic Church was doing overtly, when you look at what the masters were doing on a very, very different level, they were basically encoding us with a wisdom and a knowledge. They were programming us with it, where at some point in time it would come into awareness to be able to combat what was happening externally.
Amazing, isn't it?
It's really cool.
I mean, it's extraordinary that this has gone on. This is an excerpt just to it really goes with the theme of what we're talking about. And so we picked Chartres Cathedral as a very tangible, physical example. There's a panel in there which hits this rising, there's a summer solstice, a little hole that goes down to the floor and it beams this light. It's just precise and incredible. So this is from Freddie Silva's ebook on Chartres, which is excellent. He's talking about these alignments and these encodings throughout Chartres Cathedral, and he's talking about this particular panel in the cathedral that's lit by the rising equinox sun, the day given to the Green Man. The Green Man, very popular. You will find him. I found him on mansions in Newport. I found the Green Man. The day given to the Green Man, and this is quoting from Freddie's book, who revitalizes and raises the land from the dead each spring. That moment marks the balance of light and dark, masculine and feminine, the aim of every initiate of the mysteries.
Wow.
The symbolism was later portrayed in the checkerboard pattern, which is also in Rennes Le Chateau on the floor in the Church of Mary Magdalene, used by the Knights Templar.
Wow.
Incidentally,
Gloria,
the equinox piece.
I'm sorry, but we're done. We've got to come back
and
finish this. Yes, I'll call you and we'll get you back again real soon. But thank you so much for being here tonight.